We are now on one of the runways of Stoughton Airfield, and 37 years ago, on the evening of the 5th of June 1944, it was a different scene. From this and other airfields in and around Leicestershire left units of the 82nd Airborne Division, the All-Americans, to lead the Allied invasion of occupied France, the Atlantic Wall. All along these runways and dispersal points would have been lines of C-47 Dakota transport aircraft and gliders, ready to swallow up their cargo of men, equipment and munitions to be unloaded over the skies and fields of Normandy. To lead the initial assault, 378 C Dakota transport aircraft left carrying 6,396 paratroopers and 52 gliders carrying anti-tank guns and heavy equipment. On the following day, 375 gliders landed.
Come on, move on, buddy. That's the way. Charlie, over here. You okay? Come on. Get going. General! You all right? Yeah.
Many of the GIs who left for Normandy were destined never to return. In the 33 days of the division's combat, 1,282 were killed, 5,133 were wounded, from a total of 11,770 men. Oadby played a leading part in the story of the 82nd's planning for the raid. Major General Matthew B. Ridgway had his headquarters at Glebe Mount, Glebe Road, Oadby. The 12,000 men of the 82nd were billeted around Leicestershire. 80th Anti-Tank Glider Regiment were Oadby Racecourse, the 325th Glider Regiment at Scraptoff, the 504 Parachute Regiment at Shady Lane, Evington, and the 505 Parachute Regiment at Corn, and the divisional headquarters was at Braunston Park, Leicester. The 82nd's objective was to land on both sides of the Murderay River, secure and clear the area, and then advance westwards to cut off the port of Cherbourg. St Mary-Église was the first town on the western front to be liberated, and the honours went to the 3rd Battalion of the 505 Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 82nd Airbourne Division. My transport today is an American Jeep. It was a workhorse of the Allied armies, and it must have been a familiar sight in and around Oadby. The markings are of the 307 Engineer Battalion of the 82nd Airborne Division. Jeeps were packed into gliders and landed with the troops. The paratroopers were armed with the M1 Garrard self-loading rifle and the M1 carbine. I have one here. It had .3 caliber. It has a detachable box magazine of either 15 or 30 rounds. 5.5 million were made during the war, and it became a favourite weapon with the GIs. These are forage caps with the famous paratroop and glider badge on the front, a standard issue to all troops and worn by all with great pride. And this one is an earlier type of cap, very rare when it was just paratroopers. Stoughton Airfield was the scene of a review of the 82nd Airborne Division for General Eisenhower and General Brereton on the 11th of August 1944, after the division's return from Normandy. General Eisenhower was the Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force. On the review stand, from left to right, are Brigadier General Gavin, General Eisenhower, Major General Ridgway and General Brereton, and behind them are the regimental commanders of the 82nd Airborne Division. General Eisenhower inspected the veterans of Normandy and talked to many. At the end of the review, General Eisenhower said of the 82nd Airborne Division, "I've owed you a lot in the past, and I imagine I'll owe you a lot more in the future." One of the men who was on parade that day was Harold Lucan, known to his friends as Luke, and he is with me now. Hello Luke, what do you remember about that day?
The weather conditions were superb. The morale of the 82nd Division was at its highest, and General Eisenhower was well pleased with the results of the D-Day operations. In his final speech, if I can quote, Ike said, "I've owed you, 82nd, a lot in the past, and I imagine I'll owe you more in the future." I was a sergeant in the 80th Anti-Aircraft Battalion of the 82nd.
How old were you when you joined the 82nd Airborne, Luke?
I was 22 years old. I worked on the farm with my dad. I was born in the little village of St. Pierre in the state of Indiana.
Where did you do your training in America?
I entered the service in 1942. We did our basic training in Camp Claiborne, Louisiana, for 13 months. From there we moved to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, went on maneuvers for overseas combat duty.
When did you leave America for overseas posting?
May of 1943.
What countries did you go to and battles did you take part in before Normandy?
The countries we went to were Africa, Sicily, Italy, and from Italy we went on to Ireland and then eventually came to England. No battles were involved at all.
This is Oadby Racecourse back here, and what does it mean to you?
Brings back fond memories.
Wow, we built it here in the war.
We built it here during the war, yes.
What can you remember about Oadby in 1944?
Well, top of the list is fish and chips, of course. And then you had the church hall, dances, and I must say this, the people of Oadby were very, very courteous, especially on our return from D-Day.
What can you remember about Normandy and your trip over?
The trip over Normandy was very nice until we hit the shores of France, when we encountered tremendous amount of ack-ack. On our landing, we nearly crashed into a hedgerow, but luckily we all escaped uninjured. Normandy is more of a flat country. There's not too much that I can remember about it. Mostly hedgerows.
Is that the type of glider you used for Normandy then, Luke?
Yes, I carried a anti-tank weapon which weighed about 3 tons plus 100 rounds of ammunition plus 7 men and their sidearms and ammunition.
When you returned to Leicester after Normandy, what was your reception like, Luke?
The reception at Central Street was fabulous. It took us a half an hour to congregate together to return to Oadby, where we were welcomed with arms.
You have your uniform with you today, don't you?
I do, yes, sir.
Could you explain to us about the different badges and medals on it?
I will do.
I think this fits me better than it does you now then, Luke.
Yeah, I agree. I put on a little too much weight.
Could you explain about the badges now then?
The AA is All-American. Your stripes here each stripe represents 6 months overseas duty. Your Presidential Citation, your Purple Heart, your Good Conduct Medal. These are 3 theaters of occupation: France, Germany, and Holland. You've got your glider wings with 2 airborne invasions, your Purple Heart, your Good Conduct Medal, and your Purple Heart. I was wounded the 4th day after D-Day. Then you've got the Spread Eagle, which is the emblem of the 82nd Airborne. And this is the 1st Airborne Allied Division, which I was transferred to after the war.
What happened to you after Normandy then, Luke?
We came back to England and we went on maneuvers, knowing that more battles were in the future, not knowing where or when.
Was there any funny moments or incidents during the war?
One in particular was General Gavin and I ended up in the foxhole together.
When were you demobbed from the 82nd Airborne Division?
That was in September of 1945.
Did you ever go across to Glebe Mount, General Ridgway's home?
I spent many times there, especially on guard duty.
Well, let's go and have a look then. Has Glebe Mount changed much since General Ridgway's stay here?
Tremendous. All the lovely gardens are gone. things had been added to it.
Whereabouts were you on guard duty?
Mainly at the main gate. At night we had a guard on the grounds outside, and one guard inside during night. During the day we had a guard at the entrance.
Well, thanks a lot then, Luke, for telling us your story.
Thanks very much.
Although Glebe Mount has changed a lot since 1944, we can still recognise parts of it from original photographs. And I'm now standing on the spot where General James Gavin once stood, as we can see from this original photograph. Brigadier General Gavin, on the left-hand side, is seen here talking to Brigadier General Swift. And because of Jim Gavin's tall and slim build, he was known to the troops as General Jim or Slim Jim. Glebe Mount was the home of Major General Matthew Ridgway. He was the commanding officer of the 82nd Airborne Division between the 26th of June 1942 to the 16th of August 1944, when he was promoted to Lieutenant General and given command of the 18th Airborne Corps. The newly promoted Major General Gavin took over command of the division. Gavin was the youngest Major General in the US Army at 37 years old, and his divisional staff was one of the youngest in the European Theatre of Operations. General Eisenhower stopped off at Glebe Mount on his way home from Stoughton Review for tea with the divisional staff. This photograph was taken in 1955 when Ridgway was a 4-star general. General Ridgway celebrated his 49th birthday at Glebe Mount, and the cake was given to him by his staff. Here we can see Generals Ridgway and Gavin during the Battle of the Bulge in the winter of 1944. One of Ridgway's hallmarks was the 2 hand grenades clipped to his battle dress. After 37 years, nearly all traces of the wartime camps have disappeared. This area was the billet of the 504 Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 82nd Airborne Division at Shady Lane. They arrived here in April 1944 after returning from Italy, and some members of the 505 stayed here until December 1944. In all this time, the GIs slept in tents, and after they left, huts and watchtowers were built, and this area was used as a prisoner of war camp. When the camp had been cleared away, the area was made into a public space in honour of the GIs who stayed here. Some of the old airfield buildings remain and are used today by the Cooperative Wholesale Society at Oadby Lodge Farm. The gymnasium, operations block and the hospital are still standing. The roads are original and still in use, and so are the toilets. The building behind me is the operations room, and it was used to plot the progress of the C-47 planes. These are the old hospital buildings and are used today for storing livestock. When the airfield was constructed, a large 36-inch main sewer was built to serve the camps, and it was later used by Oadby's developers to their advantage when they built their large housing estates in the 50s and 60s. When the war in Europe was over, and the GIs had returned home, they were still remembered with much affection in Leicestershire. The ties that had been forged were too strong to break. This stone was erected in 1976 in Victoria Park. General Ridgway, at the age of 81, came over from the States to unveil it. He received a hero's welcome. A group of local people, styling themselves simply as the Friends of the 82nd, had arranged it. One of those friends and organiser is Mr. William Woodward, chairman of the United Kingdom chapter of the Friends of the 82nd Airbourne Division Veterans Association. Mr. Woodward, how did this memorial come about?
Well, as you know, David, and as an Oadby man, I'd always been interested in the fact that the 82nd Airborne Division were here during the war, although at that time I was serving with the Royal Air Force in the Far East. In 1974, I had a Jeep in my possession with 82nd Airborne markings on, and so I started to go further into the history of what they were doing here and that sort of thing. Friends joined me, things evolved from that point, and it was suggested, and we were asked, my son and I, if we would organise a tribute to the fact that, a tangible tribute to the fact that the division were here on those momentous occasions. And so this we did. Various people helped. We had every help indeed from the civic authorities. The stone itself, for example, was presented to us by Mr. David Taylor of Redland Roadstone Company. And as you see, the final result is here. Now, we had two things in mind, really, when we were starting on the project. It needed, I felt, something which depicted strength, and this certainly, I think, depicts strength. We needed something, we felt, which would blend in as a natural part of the landscape, a natural rock outcome of the landscape itself here. And so we decided on this Mount Sorrel pink granite. Again, appropriate because, of course, the Division 505 were stationed in and around Mount Sorrel and Quorn. Now, the shape, again, was appropriate because we wanted something that children wouldn't hurt themselves or pretending to be clambering all over and climbing and that sort of thing. It weighs 7 tons, believe it or not. It's immersed 3.5 feet in the ground in concrete. The reason being, again, so that it wouldn't topple over and damage anybody, that sort of thing. It was brought here on a low loader, and as you have said before and we have seen, it was unveiled by General Matthew B. Ridgway, who was a graduate of the West Point Military Academy in 1917. The wording and that sort of thing we feel is appropriate for this occasion. People say to me, why is it situated here? Well, here I feel is appropriate because we have, for example, this land associated with Simon de Montfort, who was the father of the British Parliament, and it's rather appropriate that the defenders of democracy coming from so far away, from America and overseas, should find their memorial situated in this spot. You can see here the A, which is the divisional sign, standing for All American, because the original regiments and the original division, the men came from every state in America, so it had All American. Here we have put the flags here which show the friendship between our two countries, a friendship enduring to this day. And when General Ridgway was over here, he said to me he was so pleased and surprised that after all this time, when he came back, that people said, hello, we're pleased to see you. It was almost as though he had never been away. So we have this lovely park here, this lovely historical spot connected in our history, and when we look at it, I think that the wording tells it all. I think that tells the story.
So it was. Oadby had played its part in the freeing of Europe from the Nazi dictatorship. In those few short months of 1944, Oadby made lots of friends and influenced, in a small way, major world events. I believe that in all of its long history, that this was Oadby's finest hour.